has been following entertainment news, you may have heard that Gwyneth Paltrow and her husband Chris Martin, been married for 10 years, are splitting up. Well, okay, celebrity breakup, unfortunately, it's not uncommon. But what made this particularly noteworthy is how they were doing it. And they were saying they're on a tropical island somewhere, and they are engaging in what they are calling conscious uncoupling. So if anyone is having a skeptical or cynical reaction to that, you're in good company. I went straight there. Are you kidding me? What is this? This is just more pretentious, rich celebrity psychobabble BS. Because what they're really doing is they're off in some exotic location having fruity rum drinks and breakup sex. Well, okay. In an ideal situation, we wouldn't go there. However, as a spiritual being having a human experience, I did go there, and the issue is not whether or not you go there, it's how long you stay. I didn't stay for long. I really didn't, because the little metaphysician in me went ding, 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 ding. The word conscious. Conscious uncoupling. Huh. And so I thought to myself, so if this is some kind of celebrity psychobabble BS, there's something there with the idea of doing something in a conscious way. Now, one of the things we've been talking about the last couple of weeks is the good life. And again, it's experiencing goodness in our life, and it's also talking about living the choices we make that can support us in living a good life. And so, as metaphysicians, we know that our thoughts and our words and our consciousness have a direct impact on what shows up in our lives. We also know as metaphysicians that, the good news is that we are responsible for our experience of life, and the bad news is that we are responsible for our experience of life. And so I thought, maybe there's something to this. And so I Googled it, and to Gwyneth Paltrow's credit, and she's a pretty sharp lady, to her credit, it came to find out that she had in fact been in consultation with a therapist about this whole idea of conscious uncoupling, and actually the term has been around for quite some time. Now, you may have heard of conscious coupling. That's been around. In fact, I had just gotten an email from Mary Mannon Morrissey about some workshop around conscious coupling. And so it makes sense, again, that anything we do, when we bring consciousness to it, has a direct impact on the quality of that in our experience. And in order to bring consciousness to any choice, we also have to make sure that we're staying in the present moment. Now, let me just read something that came from a definition of conscious uncoupling. It said, couples are confronting their irreconcilable differences by looking into themselves instead of blaming their partner. Now, there's a concept, huh? Each partner takes a reflective, conscious stance toward what role he or she has played in the dissolution of the couple. And the idea being that, the divorce rate is still pretty high, and wouldn't it be nicer if the process did not have to be so acrimonious? And all this, and that dirty rat, and all of that. And here's something I found out when I was researching that you may find interesting, is that, did you know that the divorce rate among young people in their 20s is lower than the average divorce rate, particularly amongst us baby boomers. Isn't that interesting? So again, the idea of bringing consciousness to everything that we do, and that means everything, gives us at any time the opportunity to be in that moment and make an empowered choice. Now, when someone passes away, particularly someone that we know and have had an experience of, you can't help, at least I can't help but engage with my thoughts about my own mortality and what I believe to be true about death. And we haven't talked about this for a while. And so in the spirit of conscious uncoupling, guess what? Death is conscious uncoupling. Now you've probably heard the story, the book Tuesdays with Morrie, and they made it into a movie about 15 years ago, and it was based on a true story of a writer who, through a variety of events, had the opportunity to reconnect with one of his college professors who had Lou Gehrig's, ALS. And so over the course of about 14 weeks, well, it was 14 weeks, he would go visit Morrie, his professor, on Tuesdays, and he would bring him a meal, and they would have a discussion. And basically, they talked about all kinds of things related to the experience of life. As Morrie kind of waxed philosophical, looking back as he was looking forward to the time when he would be passing from this earth plane. And on the fourth Tuesday, Morrie said, the truth is, once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. Now, in practitioner studies, we read a book called Who Dies by Stephen Levine. And I actually couldn't find it, but I'm pretty sure that there is a quote in the book that expands on that, and it says, to learn how to die is to learn how to live, and to learn how to live is to learn how to die. Now that makes perfect sense. It really does. And in my years of ministry, isn't that wild that I can say that? And I think I said last week I'm coming up on 10 years, and that's really wild. I've actually never been with a person at the moment of their passing, but I have been with people that have been close. And I've had the opportunity to walk the journey with some of those people. And here's what I have found is true. The more a person is at peace, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute, with the idea of their passing, the more easily and gracefully they're going to move through the experience. Whereas if someone is not in a place of accepting it and is fighting it and resisting it, they're going to have a rough go of it until they reach a place of letting go. And sometimes that comes really late in the process. But I personally believe that at some point there is that letting go. There is that moment of conscious uncoupling. Now what I can tell you is that I walked this journey with Tom Towner. And he went from a place of not being accepting of what was going on with him, and he moved from that place to the place where he was at peace with it. Last time I saw him was a little over 2 weeks before he passed, and when I walked into the room, I said, "Hi, Tom, how are you doing?" And he looked at me and he said, "I'm ready for this to be my last day." And I was taken a little bit aback by that, Because in the moment, he certainly didn't look like that was, imminent in any way. But as I reflected on it, what he was really saying is that he was ready. And one of the things we talked about is he talked about things seeming smaller and less important. And what I shared with him based on what I know in my experience is that's part of the process is your world shrinks because you're letting go of things. You're just letting go of things. And the image that comes into my mind is like a hot air balloon. You've seen them, right? And there is a time when they are on the ground, they are tethered to the ground, and there's a reason they're there, to let people in so that they can enjoy this ride. But in order for them to enjoy the ride, you've got to untether it so that it can rise. And that's what I feel the process of death and the process of change. It's about letting go so that we can soar into a new experience of life. Now, the Buddhists teach us that attachment is the cause of suffering. And we move out of suffering as we release our attachments. And so that applies not just as we're moving through the process of transitioning into our next experience of life, but I believe and can see and observe that it also takes place when we are moving through any kind of a significant change in our lives. In order for that change to take place, we've got to let go of something more often than not. And that's not always a bad thing, negative thing. I love Jesse Jennings saying about that is that sometimes we got to let go of the good for the better. I really love that idea. But you're letting go of something. So that when Tom did pass, it was peaceful because he was ready and he had let go. Now, another person that some of you have been with us for a while, remember Rosemary Parmenter, and she was one of our part of the Magnificent Seven, our first group of Centers for Spiritual Living practitioners, and she was a spitfire, but she was also very clear about her relationship with God, the divine presence, so that as her time of passing became imminent, she was perfectly at peace. She knew exactly what was going to happen. Now, in her mind, in her map of the world, if you will, she was going to be with God. And her image of that may be different from my image of that or your image of that. And I don't think it matters. And in fact, and this is just me, I believe that our attitudes about what happens after we pass into our next expression, I think that just as our beliefs and our thoughts on this earth plane have an impact on our experience, why would that not be true about our next expression of life? That our beliefs and our thoughts and our ideas about that would impact that experience, not just in the process, but also afterwards. And so Rosemary's image of being with God was very powerful for her so that she could move peacefully, because there was almost even something about that she was looking forward to. It was interesting, the idea, as I sat with the idea of how moving into the experience of passing, of death, if you were, holds lessons for us for life. Now, there's a book in the Buddhist tradition, and it is popularly known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Nice title, right? And part of the reason it received that title is because there's also the Egyptians wrote a book, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And what was really interesting to me, you know how I love connecting dots, and so I love this. So the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the translation of its title, the more accurate translation of the word says, Book of Emerging Forth into the Light. Yeah, huh? Book of Emerging Forth into the Light. Now, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the actual translation of those words are the liberation through hearing during the intermediate state. Okay, I know. It's not quite as elegantly simple as emerging forth into the light. Well, you'll see the connection straight away. So in the Buddhist tradition, as Doug was mentioning, that we are in a constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Life, death, and rebirth. Constant cycle of that. And so the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the intermediate state, is the state between death and rebirth. And they split it into 3 different experiences. They're called bardos. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce these. I have too much respect for the Buddhists to do that. Maybe Doug might know what they are. But the first one is called the Bardo of the Moment of Death. And you want to know what that is? The experience of the clear light of reality. The experience of the clear light. And that, this one, ding, 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 with the Egyptians saying about emerging forth into the light. So light is definitely metaphorically, if not actual, part of that process. The idea of going into the light and near-death experiences. And I'm not even going to go there today. That's a whole other topic. So what I distill that down to, the clear light of reality, I say that's seeing clearly. That's knowing, seeing. It's like in 1 Corinthians, at first I saw through a mirror darkly, and now that I am a man, I see clearly. Second bardo is called the bardo of the experiencing of reality. So we see reality as the first process. The second process is we experience reality. Now, my distillation of that is I call that truth. The experience of reality is when we know the truth. Now, here's a quote from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And it says, perhaps the deepest reason why we are afraid of death is because we do not know who we are. Now that's kind of a theme that we hear in metaphysics a lot, is that part of our path of enlightenment is moving us to that place of knowing who we are. That is the essential purpose of our journey. So the second bardo, the experience of reality, the truth of who we are. We know it, we see it, we experience it. The third bardo is the bardo of rebirth. And that is symbolically represented by figures intertwining and the idea of oneness. Heard that one before? So we see clearly the truth about who we are. We experience that, and we ultimately move into the place of knowing our oneness with all life, knowing that we are connected, we are one. It occurred to me that this same process applies to life, because we are always in a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Jesus said, I die daily. And we know that he's not talking about physical death. He's talking about the death of false ideas and false beliefs and habits. Because whenever we let go of something, it is a death in a way. That we have, for whatever reason, possibly even kind of dysfunctional, it served a purpose in our life for a time. And we realize it doesn't serve us anymore, and we let it go. We release it. And in that respect, it dies to us. And since nature abhors a vacuum, something comes in to take its place. And if we are conscious in the moment, we have the opportunity of choosing what that is and choosing for it to be something that is life-affirming. Remember last week, our choices are life-affirming, life-negating, or neutral. When we're present in the moment, we have the opportunity of bringing in a life-affirming choice. So any type of change, as I mentioned before, involves a letting go of something. It's the circle of life, how it works. And so part of how we affect change in our lives, just follow the 3 steps for a moment, is number one, and certainly I know that this is true for me, is I get clarity about something. I get clear that I either need to let something go or bring something in. And normally, the both kind of happen in concert with one another. As I am embracing a new idea, I'm having to let go of an old idea, and I'm doing that because it doesn't work for me anymore. So anything that, releasing body mass, I had to let go of habits of my relationship with food and exercise and all that good stuff, and welcome in a new way of showing up in the world. It's conscious uncoupling. Isn't it? We see this ain't working anymore. And we choose because we see clearly. Okay? We see it clearly. We have clarity. Then the second piece is the experience of reality or the truth. So we see this, it's like, well, I don't think that's serving me anymore. So what's the truth about that? And when I recognize the truth about whatever that is, then in the moment I have the opportunity to make an empowering choice because I see clearly with what's going on. I know the truth so that I can then make an empowering choice. The third part of it is the idea of oneness. Another reason that we experience unhappiness and discomfort is because of that part of us that believes we're separate from God. And I know that that's true for me, is that if I am in a tough situation, a difficult situation, a challenging or a painful situation, I feel really separate sometimes. You know, it's kind of like, where's God in this again? Tell me again where God is. And that's why I talk to my prayer partners or practitioners or colleagues, because I need to be reminded of that. And once I can shift that perception of separation into that perception of oneness, then I'm not experiencing that level of discomfort. Now let me give you another way that works with respect to the idea of letting something go and welcoming something back in. Now, we are apt as people to label things good, bad, positive, negative, right, wrong. And of course, the minute we assess a label to it, we are limiting it, we are judging it, we are separating it from life. We're kind of putting it in a little box. And sometimes we want to take that box, lock it, throw it in the closet, lock the closet with triple locks, because we don't want to see it, we don't want to know it, we don't want to deal with it. Sorry, folks, it doesn't work that way. Now, sometimes in our own lives, we have aspects of our personality that we're not too crazy about. At least I know I do. Part of oneness and wholeness is recognizing that we are all of it, and it is all okay, and it is all God. So, when it comes to the idea of making a different choice, letting something go that doesn't serve us, even when that something is possibly really life negating, and we see it clearly, we know the truth, we let it go. But the thing is that we don't cut off our arm. We see it all as part of wholeness, because the minute we start separating things, the minute we start compartmentalizing things, we are saying that there is God and something else, when there is only God. So that when we reach the place of what metaphysical teaching calls embracing seeming opposites and seeing it all as part of the one, then that is an important step on our spiritual journey. So even when we let something go, we're not getting rid of it, we are integrating it into a different context of how we see life. So when we go through change, we are experiencing a death of sort. And I'm just going to touch on this because I really put it together how in dealing with life and we deal with change, then we are really equipped to deal with our passing. Now, for some people, sometimes it takes the imminent awareness of their imminent passing to motivate them to engage with life and see those lessons and then be able to start letting things go as part of that process. So we've all heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? We know the stages of... Now here's the thing. It's really the stages of dying, of moving through the process, and it's been co-opted into the experience of grieving. I buy it and I don't buy it. But just for the sake of the steps are anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I had a light go on. I said, you know what? When I'm experiencing a change, particularly one that I may not be just rah, rah, let's go do this. I go through that anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. First of all, I'm pissed. I don't want to do this. Why do I have to do this? Why is this changing? I know it. I'm comfortable with it. I'm familiar with it. Why? Why do I have to let it go? I don't like it. Then it's like, well, maybe I don't. Maybe I don't. I can just stick my head in the sand and it'll just go away. I don't have to deal with it. And then it's like, okay, all right, so if I've got to do this, what if? What if? So let's make a deal here. Maybe I go a little bit, I'll just if I just do a little bit, maybe that'll be okay, and maybe we can make this a little easier and kind of smooth it over. Maybe if I numb it out, it won't be so bad. We bargain. Try to play, let's make a deal with life to make this an easier experience. And then we come to the realization that none of that works. It's like, well, that's a bummer. That sucks. And then finally, come to the place of it is what it is. And so at some level or another, as I thought about this, we move through that every time we're faced with a change. And sometimes one step is bigger than the other, and we have different periods of time and all kinds of variables. But I really love the idea that what we can learn about life and death empowers us to live consciously in life and to live consciously through the experience that we call death. Conscious uncoupling. Who'd have known you'd get inspiration from entertainment tonight, But you know what? That just proves my point. That God is anywhere, and we can find inspiration and ideas anywhere. And that's why we're going to have that spiritual insight circle. Because if we would have had that this last Thursday, what I would have brought to the table is this whole thing about conscious uncoupling. And I saw it on entertainment tonight. Now, I'd like to read you, finish with a couple of quotes from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Again, it is about as much about life as it is about death. Here's the first quote. It says, above all, be at ease. Be as natural and spacious as possible. Slip quietly out of the noose of your habitual anxious self, releasing all grasping, and relax into your true nature. Sounds like a pretty good idea to me. I love the idea of the noose of our anxious self. I know that one, been there, done that. And grasping, attachment. Let go. And when we do that, we can experience our true self that is perfect, whole, and complete. And here's the last one. And this is kind of a benediction of sorts. And I'll end on this. Let peace work on you and enable you to gather your scattered mind into the mindfulness of calm abiding. And awaken in you the awareness and insight of clear seeing. And you will find all your negativity dismissed, disarmed, your aggression dissolved, and your confusion evaporating slowly like mist into the vast and stainless sky of your absolute nature. You let go. We let God. And when we do that consciously, we are consciously uncoupling.